for people listening to this, how can this scale be applied in real life situations, such as evaluating compatibility or assessing reliability?
The first thing is you want to assess yourself in a specific context. For example, take regarding your job or your work. Where am I? Where am I on that scale? And that will give you a new understanding of it. Now, there's such a thing as a workaholic. A workaholic is at level 4. He cannot stop working. That's abnormal. That guy, once he recognizes that, can then move himself up to 3, where he can stop. He can put a limitation. Look, it's 5 o'clock, Friday, I'm going home for the weekend. That's, as with all the others, the whole idea is you spot what level you're at and you move yourself up to the next one up. If a person wants to be successful, he can say, I have to move up to can be stopped. Okay, how could I be stopped? In other words, he has to anticipate all the things that could go wrong. And by doing so, he can indemnify himself against them and thereby be successful. I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown natural phenomena, which greatly aided the understanding of people, from which I created a revolutionary practical philosophic system called Septemics, and published it in the book, Septemics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. Today, we're going to look at one chapters in that book.
Briefly, Jim, can you outline how you came across this concept and what makes it unique in understanding human behavior?
I don't know that I can do that briefly. It's a long explanation. It probably would take at least 10 minutes. The story really begins when I was accepted into engineering school at age 16. Now, of course, I thought, like all the other students, that I was going to be engineering something physical, such as electrons or airfoils or motors. By the time I had my bachelor's degree, it was clear to me that I wanted to engineer the human psyche, because it's the area of greatest mystery and unknown, and the area in which we as a race are failing miserably. 95% of the problems exist in industrialized society because people do not understand people, don't understand the wife, the husband, the son, the boss, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this book solves that problem because it gives you a precise, reliable way to understand people across 35 axes. To make a long story short, I had a long career as a human development engineer, working one-on-one with hundreds of clients of every description for cumulatively thousands of hours. I started to notice incidentally as I was doing this, while my clients were improving, that they would improve in ways that were predictable to me. I was able to predict the outcome of the session. I never told this to anyone, but I made notes. As the decades rolled by, I came to realize that the client would be at a specific level on a specific scale, and that as a result of our interaction, he would go up to the next level. Now, this happened thousands and thousands of times, so my hypotheses were redundantly verified by the sessions themselves, because the clients didn't know anything about this. So by about 1995, I had about 32 scales of varying lengths that I knew were correct from direct observation. There's no theory of septemics. This was all done empirically. I also had a client who I was pondering, and I realized that client was at a level on a specific scale that I had not previously observed. This was the scale that is now called the scale of basic purposes, although back then it didn't have that name. When I inserted this scale, it was obvious to me where to insert it. The scale manifested mathematically. It was obvious to me that this had mathematics embedded in it. That told me this has to be natural law, like the Fibonacci sequence. And I already knew that scale was correct. So having a 7th level really perfected it. I then thought, whatever this is, it's natural law. And having taken 26 semesters of math, that was clear to me. This was inherently mathematical. Then I thought, wait a minute, I wonder how many of these other scales are actually 7-level scales that had not been developed all the way, because I wasn't developing anything. I was just helping my clients and making notes. So knowing what I was looking for, I studied these 32 scales, and in a short period of time, each one went to 7 levels, and as it did, it manifested mathematically. So in a matter of months, I suddenly had 32 7-level scales, all of which had mathematics embedded in them. And I said, this looks like a subject to me. I found something here. See, I knew these data were correct because I had been observing them for decades. I could go from helping people by the hundreds, which is what I have been doing as a human development engineer, to helping people by the millions if I put this in a book and get it out. So I have to write a book. So the first draft was completed in December of 95. I sent it to colleagues of mine, all of whom had graduate degrees in one subject or another, and they all loved it. They had different responses, but very positive responses. So I spent the next 25 years of my life writing the book. And I could explain why it took 25 years if you want, but you don't have to go into that. I think I answered your question.
That's great. Thanks, Jim. Can you give an overview of the scale of stopping?
Sure. All right.
Let me just bring it up.
Okay. Now, in this context, stopping means both preventing and discontinuing. So you might say, I stopped smoking. You mean I discontinued smoking. But you could also say, I stopped him from punching me. That means you prevented him from punching you. Now, oddly enough, in this scale, both of those concepts work together. This is a very big subject. As you pointed out, this is a spiral scale, meaning there is an apparent congruence between levels 1 and 7. It's easy to mix up level 7 must not stop, which is compulsive, with level 1 cannot be stopped, which is invincible. In other words, they look similar when you observe the person. A person who cannot be stopped might be misassessed as someone who must not stop. Obviously, that's the biggest error you could make in this because you're mistaking the worst. People do make that mistake. It's more made by downscale people than upscale people. In other words, downscale people will look at a very upscale person and say, he's just compulsive, when in fact, he's not. He's not compulsive. He's invincible, which is a completely different thing. This is a quantum scale, meaning there's no intervening gradation. There's nothing between the levels. So if you're at level 3 and you go to level 3, you do so instantaneously in perhaps a billionth of a second. It's a specific scale, meaning there's no general finding here. You can't just say a person is at this level, period. It has to have a context. How is he stopping regarding his marriage? How is he stopping regarding his business? How is he stopping regarding his children? So it has to have a context to make sense. Now, the axis here on the right, the dotted vertical line, tells you what we're measuring. One of the most important things about this is that I give you the yardstick and I tell you what the yardstick is a yardstick of. So this goes from freedom, which is above level 1, to entrapment, which is below level 7, meaning absolute freedom is unattainable, absolute entrapment are unattainable. You can get very close enough that you can't see the difference. So it's virtually free or virtually entrapped. So that's what we're measuring here. As the person that has more freedom, he's higher on this scale. As the person is more entrapped, he's lower on this scale. There's the horizontal line in the middle that separates sane from insane. This line shows up in many scales. It's not always a separation between sane and insane, but the horizontal line in the middle is often there. Now, in this case, a person who is at level 1, 2, or 3 is sane in that context or on that subject. A person who's at level 4, 5, 6, or 7 is insane in that context. And of course, the further down you go, the more insane. And as regards 1, 2, or 3, the higher up you go, the more sane the person is. So that tells you that sanity is freedom in the ultimate state. And insanity is entrapment in the ultimate state. Was there a question before I go on with this?
I was doing my own research into this because I was trying to find examples for each of the levels. In your book, you cite historical figures, which gives shape to each of these scales. And one of the people I was looking at level 7 was Howard Hughes. He exhibited compulsive behavior, particularly in his later years, and it was marked by obsessive compulsive behavior, including extreme reclusiveness and hygiene rituals and an aversion to germs. His inability to stop his compulsions, such as excessive hand washing and isolation, prevented him from leading a normal life. So his compulsive behavior was entangled with the trauma he experienced. And despite the negative impact on his life, he could not stop these habits. Would you position him at level 7?
I'm not able to do that. I would have to study the man more than I have. I am very familiar with him, but I've never done a septemic analysis of him. Often, when you observe a trait, it's on a scale other than the one you're observing. That happens a lot. In other words, this thing about his being compulsive, it could be a position on another scale, not necessarily this one. I don't know enough about him to comment on that. That might be true and it might not. He was a pretty upscale person. He accomplished a lot. He was very smart. He was like brilliant neurotic, would be a way to put it. So he was high in some skills and low in others. But let me just go into the scale and perhaps you can infer some things from that. It's not at all obvious that must not stop is the bottom of the scale. Many people might think must stop is the bottom, but it's not. Must not stop is crazier than must stop. Must not stop the person is compulsive. For example, Jack the Ripper going around London murdering ladies or women. I don't know how many there was. It was many. Clearly, that was a compulsion. He couldn't stop. So he definitely was at that level, must not stop. Serial killers, I would say, are at this level. But I think also like a drug addict or an alcoholic, the alcoholic must not stop drinking. He is compelled to keep drinking. And of course, that's a diagnosable mental illness. I'm sure Jack the Ripper was diagnosably mentally ill as well. I don't think there's any question about that. I think anybody who's at this level is diagnosably mentally ill. Up from that, slightly less insane is must stop. This person is suppressive. He's going to stop something. Now, it could be in himself or others. This might be a person who must stop abortions. They must stop. He has no nuanced position on this. This is the guy who blows up an abortion clinic. He is suppressive in that regard. This would be like a person who's like sexually repressed. Oh, we must stop sex. Or this could even be like the Salem witch burnings, killed all those women as witches. We must stop them. This is like somebody who gets on a jihad, holy war, and you get really carried away. As crazy as this is, it's not as crazy as must not stop.
So would you position Adolf Hitler because he felt compelled to suppress certain groups to achieve his vision of a pure Aryan society? There was a compulsion to eliminate what he considered threats to the Aryan race, resulting in policies that led to the Holocaust and widespread persecution.
I would spot him at level 6. Must stop the Jews, must stop the gays, must stop the gypsies, all these people who he didn't like or he thought were noxious or bad for Germany.
The other person I looked at is Joseph McCarthy, because he had an intense fear of communism, which drove him to suppress perceived threats, leading to the infamous Red Scare. So I wondered, with his suppression of dissent, that in a sense provided a platform for his political ambitions, which entangled him in a quest for power. Would you position him at the must stop?
First of all, again, I don't know enough about Joseph McCarthy to spot him on a level on any scale. I know about him in the general historical way. I think in general, the communists in the media made him out to be much worse than he actually was, which is not unusual. We see the same thing going on with Donald Trump now. They're saying he's going to be a dictator and other crazy things that are not supported by anything he said. Some of them are just crazy, but some are just lying, that's all, for political purposes. His poll numbers are astronomical. They're desperate to get rid of him. So they're going to say every bad thing in the world about him that they think will scare some voters. That's going on with Elon Musk now, since he has stepped into the political arena tangentially, not directly. He's being attacked by all kinds of people. I don't understand it at all because I have just such admiration for the man. Not only is he brilliant, he's worked as much as 120 hours a week. He slept on the floor in the factory for a long time to keep those businesses going. He's under attack, and almost anybody who achieves anything is going to come under attack. That's the way human society is. So let's move up to level 5, which is stopped. Now, this is what most people will observe in their lives. This is a person who's stopped. He's apathetic. He's not trying to stop anything. He's just stopped. This is like a guy, he stays in his house, he doesn't work, he doesn't go out, he doesn't talk to his friends. That's what apathy is. Now, apathy means literally no feeling. From the point of view of this scale, it's pretty close to what we have here. Stopped is what you get from a person who's apathetic. He stopped.
To be able to get a better penetration into some of these levels, I've looked into certain historical and current figures. One of them was Howard Schultz and his tenure with Starbucks. He entered a phase where he distanced himself from active leadership in the company. And despite having achieved immense success with Starbucks, he started to withdraw from the pursuit of innovations and ventures, and his passion for pushing boundaries started to wane. And he became totally indifferent to exploring new opportunities. There was a lack of visionary leadership. He was disinterested in shaping the future. And that spark that once fueled his ambitions started to dim. He exhibited a lack of enthusiasm for new challenges. I was trying to find the driving forces in terms of this particular person, this character, because he accomplished these significant feats with Starbucks. And once you reach a certain zenith, you might want to step back because that might be a natural inclination to take a more passive approach to certain aspects of life after years of dedication to building and leading Starbucks. But I'm wondering if he experienced a shift in priorities and focused more on other aspects of his life. But there was a certain apathy when I was reading between the lines where he just lost complete interest. So I wondered if he was at that position on the scale.
I can't comment on that. I know very little about him. My guess is I can think of several other scales are close to what you're saying, but I would have to know the facts.
Right.
And the main thing about analyzing anybody is to know the facts. And since I don't, I can't comment on it.
Okay.
So going up to level 4 cannot stop. So this is like the drug addict or the drunk. He can't stop. Or let's say a guy who's eating compulsively. He can't eat 2 scoops of ice cream. He has to eat the whole pint. See, that's abnormal. Insane, but it's not as obviously insane as the ones below. So that is neurotic, but not psychotic. So that's something that I think most people can see, that a person gets into something like gambling. The difference between successful gamblers, meaning the ones who win, and unsuccessful gamblers is that the successful gamblers, meaning the professional gamblers, they know when to stop. That's it, I'm done. Rather than these degenerate gamblers who can't stop themselves. They literally cannot stop. They just keep going and going. You could mix up level 4 with level 7, must not stop. But for most people who are degenerate gamblers, it's just that they cannot stop.
So someone like the Roman Emperor Caligula, he was a crazy guy. He had this erratic behavior. He was cruel. He was driven by mental instability, which again contributed to impulsive and destructive decisions. He had this desire for absolute power and the belief in his divinity to excessive displays of authority. But he had these sadistic tendencies which manifested in these actions that brought harm to so many individuals within his court. So I'm wondering if he was someone at that insane level that just could not stop.
He unquestionably was at the bottom part of the scale. But remember, this is about context. So he might be at one level regarding the Senate, another level regarding the military,
Right.
another level regarding his wives. But clearly, he was insane. And so if a person is insane, he's going to show up on one of these levels in some context. It might not be the same level for every context, but he sounds to me like somebody who was at level 6 or 7. So then we cross over the horizontal line into the sane realm. We get to can stop. This is a normal person. A normal person can stop. He says, boy, these hot dogs are good, but I had 2, that's enough. See, that's a normal person. He doesn't need 6, like Babe Ruth once did. Or this is a person who, like in gambling, he says, okay, I got $200. And so he goes to Vegas, he blows his 200, and says, okay, I'm done. So this is what we expect from a normal person. This person is sane.
Could we put Thomas Jefferson on that scale because his commitment to Enlightenment ideals and intellectual rationality influenced his decision making? So he had that strong belief in democratic principles, which guided his actions, which obviously allowed him to contribute to the founding principles of the United States. So I wonder, with his advocacy for individual freedoms, which was reflected in the Declaration of Independence, showcased that commitment to freedom. Would we put him at that normal level of rationality because of the way that he decided things?
No, Jefferson is somebody I know very well because I've studied him. He was at 2, can be stopped, successful.
Right.
He was a very successful person. You see, in order to be successful, you have to have a sense that you can be stopped. In other words, where is the edge of the road? A person who at 3, okay, he can stop, but he doesn't necessarily have the insight that he can be stopped. That is what a successful person has. Talk to anybody in any field, and they will tell you about the limitations. We have the unions, we have government regulations, and then we have to worry about the banks. There's all these factors. So they have an idea that they can be stopped in a variety of ways. And that's what you get from a successful person. This is perhaps not what people would expect. But when we talk about a person being a realist, that's what we mean. He has a sense that he can be stopped. See, Hitler had this crazy idea that Germany could conquer all of the world, or at least all of Europe. And that's not can be stopped. That's some crazy thing at the bottom of this scale. A person who has a judicious, informed approach always thinks about how he can be stopped, like a smart lawyer. I don't think the judge will let me get away from that. I'm not going to raise that issue. So he has a sense he can be stopped. Or, well, that may be true, but we don't have any evidence to support it. So that argument can be stopped. So I'm not going to make that argument. See, so if you talk to bright people who are successful, you will see this all over the place. They have a sense that they can be stopped in a variety of places. And that's why they're successful. They're circumspect, which means looking around. When you look around, you can be stopped. I'll give you an example. Rocky Marciano, the only heavyweight champ who never lost a bout. He was 49-0. Okay, with 43 knockouts, which is astonishing. Many people say Ali was the greatest heavyweight of all time. He was beaten a few times. So Marciano is by himself in that category. And he came on TV and said, I probably have a few more fights in me because I'm starting to get older, but I'm going to retire right now. See, he had a sense that he could be stopped. He had a sense that some younger, stronger guy might be able to beat him. So he had plenty of money, notoriety, fame, everything else. And one day he came out and retired because he had a sense that he could be stopped.
How would you define an individual who can stop themselves when necessary at that level 3? Because I put Warren Buffett at level 3. He's successful. He demonstrates rational decision making and his ability to control his impulses. He's still living in the same house that he grew up in. He hasn't gone out and bought a $30 million mansion somewhere. He doesn't drive a Ferrari.
Right. Buffett is somebody I know very well because I'm involved in the market. So I've studied him. He is at 2, can be stopped. He is keenly aware, if you listen to him speak, don't do this, don't do that, you can be stopped. So that's why he keeps winning, because he has an idea that he can be stopped. Can stop is what you get from the average guy. Let's say he's watching TV and it's getting to be 11 o'clock. I better go to bed. This looks like a good movie, but I'm not going to watch it because I don't want to be tired tomorrow. He can stop. So that's what we get from normal people. It's level 3. Level 3 people do this all the time. Would you like another cup of coffee? No, it's going to keep me up. See, he can stop. Does he like coffee? Yes, it's delicious, but he knows he can stop. That's enough. He doesn't want it to affect his sleep later. So that's normal. And a lot of those people who can stop don't have this idea of can be stopped. So if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you better be at level 2, or you're going to get your clock cleaned. At the top is cannot be stopped. That is what invincible means.
Any successful entrepreneur, as far as I know, they can face unforeseen challenges that affect their business. They can cultivate the resources they need when they need it because they're problem solvers. Can you share what your thoughts are on the balance between success and vulnerability? How does one navigate being successful yet susceptible to external influences?
A person is successful because he understands that he's susceptible to external influences. Like a guy gets in a ring, right? If he doesn't know what he's doing, he doesn't protect himself, he doesn't know the other boxer, he doesn't really realize how he can be stopped, and he winds up taking a nap on the canvas. Whereas the guy who's smart, he respects this guy. Like Ali, who I said most experts, in fact, all the experts that I know of say he was the greatest heavyweight of all time. And even though I don't particularly like watching him box because of his style, they're probably right. He was once asked if he thought he could have beat Marciano. He said, I don't know if I could have beat him or not. See, he thought he could be stopped by this guy. So that's why he was successful. So when you go into a boxing match, to continue the analogy, you're paying attention. All right, you're thinking, okay, this guy could land one on me and knock me out. See, there's all kinds of things that you're doing to be aware that you can be stopped.
So would you put Elon Musk at this level?
Absolutely. That's somebody I know very well. If you listen to him speak, he goes on ad infinitum about all the things that could stop him and his company. And he makes it perfectly clear how hard it is because of all those countervailing forces. So he's dealing with them all the time.
Like you said, he can navigate his success because he acknowledges his vulnerability to those external influences. He has awareness.
He has a degree in physics. He has some witticism that he says something like, physics is the law and everything else is a suggestion. He's chief engineer of some of his companies. So he knows all about how those rockets are built, all about how those cars are built, and all the other companies that he's involved in. He knows technically how they work, why they work. Yeah. And in order to do that, you have to be cognizant of your limitations in order to be a successful engineer. That is part of the personality of an engineer. For example, the way you calculate is you're always taking into account the margin of error. For example, you have a bridge. You can actually calculate how much weight, figure out how many cars can fit on it. The weight of the average car, you can calculate how much weight this bridge has to hold. And that is not the number they use. They use a larger number, always, a significantly larger number. Same if you're designing an airfoil. You can calculate the forces on this airfoil. That is not the number you use. You use a bigger number because you're cognizant of can be stopped. Things can go wrong. You cannot engineer things to be on the edge. That doesn't work. You have to be in safe territory as an engineer, which is why it took me 20 years to engineer septemics after I had the initial phenomena. I was looking at all the ways it could be stopped and solving those sequentially.
Yeah. In your observations, how rare is it for someone to reach the level of cannot be stopped? Are there any examples of historical figures or personal acquaintances who embody this level?
Yes, there are persons. Persons from history are Samson, who's discussed in the Bible, is presented as a historical person. And they say he slew 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass. That's clearly an invincible person. Also Hercules in Greek mythology. Now, coming from a Judeo-Christian culture, we don't think of the Bible as mythology, but to me, Greek mythology, Judaic mythology, whether it's history or mythology, we really don't know. I regard Hercules very much the way I regard Samson.
How rare is it for someone to reach the level of cannot be stopped?
Very rare. But remember, this is a specific scale. And I'll give you an example. Sometimes in baseball, we have a pitcher who's having the best game of his career. Like when Roger Clemens struck out 20 batters in one game. You only have 27 outs. He struck out 20 batters. If you listen to the hitters, they'll say, he's unhittable today. It's a common phrase in baseball. Oh yeah, he was unhittable. You get shut out, couldn't score a run, nobody hit the ball hard. They just say, yeah, he was unhittable today. And when you look at the Hall of Fame pitchers, they had games like that, like Bob Gibson. There were games where he was unhittable. Just nothing you could do. There's also a famous story about Reggie Jackson, the great slugger, on the sixth game of the 1978 World Series. He shows up in the dugout before the game, and he says to the players, get on my back. I've got this. He saw 3 strikes, and he hit all of them for home runs. First at bat, they were so afraid of him, they didn't throw him a strike. They threw him 4 balls, he walked. Next at bat, first pitch, home run. They changed pitchers. Comes out for the third at bat, another pitcher, first pitch, home run. They changed pitchers again, didn't matter. First pitch, home run. He knew it ahead of time. So on that day, he was unstoppable. You could say Reggie Jackson could not be stopped. He sees 3 strikes, hits 3 home runs. It's a famous historical example.
Would you position Nelson Mandela, because of his commitment to ending apartheid in South Africa? He showed an unwavering dedication that seemed invincible. Despite the 27 years in jail, he maintained his commitment to that anti apartheid cause, which illustrated a resilience that appeared impervious to external pressures, which eventually then led to the end of apartheid and his election as the first Black president of South Africa. That is a testament to his seemingly unstoppable impact.
First of all, I don't know enough about him to spot him on any scale, although he would be an interesting case study. I would never describe anyone who spent 27 years in prison as being invincible. Now, you might argue that eventually he was successful, and that's level two. I don't think that applies here. As I have said many times, if you take any of these scales and lie it on its side and look at the demographics, you see something like a bell curve, an imperfect bell curve. So in most of these scales, there's a very tiny population at the extremes. And the main reason why most people have difficulty grasping the extreme levels, particularly 1 and 7, because it's outside of their purview, it's outside of their reality. They haven't seen that. A lot of people who look at Samson and say, that's just a myth. But this is something you see a lot in literature of the superhero, like Superman. Superman was invincible. So the concept is there. And this is something the Germans had the Übermensch, which means Superman. And that was something that they aspired to, where they were going to be invincible. Now, in their case, it was just an idea. I don't think any of them got there. I think most of them were at or near the bottom of the scale, which ties into the fact that this is a spiral scale. So you have someone who's at 7 who thinks he's at 1. So you see some guy sitting in a nut house in a rubber room, and you say, what's your name? And he says, Napoleon Bonaparte. So the guy's insane, but he thinks he's invincible.
For people listening to this, how can this scale be applied in real life situations, such as evaluating compatibility or assessing reliability?
The first thing is you want to assess yourself in a specific context. For example, take regarding your job or your work. Where am I? Where am I on that scale? And that will give you a new understanding of it. Now, there's such a thing as a workaholic. A workaholic is at level 4. He cannot stop working. That's abnormal. That guy, once he recognizes that, can then move himself up to 3, where he can stop. He can put a limitation. Look, it's 5 o'clock, Friday, I'm going home for the weekend. That's, as with all the others, the whole idea is you spot what level you're at and you move yourself up to the next one up. If a person wants to be successful, he can say, I have to move up to can be stopped. Okay, how could I be stopped? In other words, he has to anticipate all the things that could go wrong. And by doing so, he can indemnify himself against them and thereby be successful. So you could look at a list. How many ways can I be stopped? A guy is launching a business. He needs to do analysis. What are all the things that can go wrong? Make a list. And then he has to solve all of those problems prophylactically, and then he will be successful.
Have you ever been surprised by someone's position on this scale?
I think the short answer is no. To me, this is very matter of fact. If you invite me to your garden to look at your flowers, that's a tulip, that's a hydrangea, that's a rose, and that's a nasturtium. Big deal. They see what's there. So I see people the way a botanist sees flowers. Okay, I see what's there. There's no big deal about it. I'm not often surprised. But there are some historical people that surprised me. For example, I am a student of Napoleon, a very interesting person, and I was surprised to figure out that he was a normal on the scale of basic purposes. That would be a surprise to most people. But if you really look at his personality, he was a conformist. Same thing with Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was normal on the scale of basic purposes. He was fantastically successful. So you have to realize that, as I point out, a person can be successful in any area. That doesn't necessarily say anything about where he is on any particular scale. So you have to parse it. In other words, when you're analyzing a person, you have to pay attention to the context and see what's there. The whole septemic analysis promotes objectivity. Even if you fail to correctly spot somebody, just the fact that you're observing the person is beneficial. Sometimes you're trying to spot somebody on a certain scale and you can't, But then you'll go to another and you'll say, that's what I was thinking about. I see where he is on this scale. George Washington is another one. George Washington was at level 3 on the scale of basic purposes. That was not obvious to me. I thought he might be at level 2, but when I really studied the man, what did he say? What did he do? What was he really like? I realized he was at level 3. You have to analyze a person across the spectrum. You can't just look at one thing. When we talk about cults and hero worship, that is the mistake people make. And one pet peeve of mine is people accept the political advice of athletes and actors. So you have people who've never even been to college, have never been in politics, don't have any particular knowledge of history or political science, and they're going to accept their advice. Why? So you have politicians who know a lot about their fields. Those are the people you should pay attention to. And what's really daffy to me is that these people think they know what they're talking about. You listen to some of these actors who spout these political theories and such, in many cases, have no idea what they're talking about. They're completely ignorant, and yet they're completely certain about what they're doing. Those are two different things. And that is a lot of the benefit of this subject, because it gets you to really inspect yourself. Where am I on this? So let's say you're a cigarette smoker, right? You realize you cannot stop. That's level 4. So you want to move yourself up to can stop. So that becomes your target. You need to get yourself into a state where you can stop. So in general, you have to be careful not to generalize, especially with a specific scale. So you have these people who become general experts on subjects when they're really not. They know a certain thing. For example, Noam Chomsky is one of the world's leading experts in linguistics. So on that subject, I listen to every word he says. When he gets out of that and starts talking about other things that he doesn't really know, then I tend not to pay attention. What does he know? You hear this sometimes in these magazines. They'll ask people, for example, they asked the owner of a porn magazine, who's the greatest guitarist? And his answer was Keith Richard. Now, I can tell you as a professional guitarist, that is absurdly preposterous. Keith Richard did a nice job. He did what was good for that band, not knocking him, but comparing him to John McLaughlin or Al Di Meola or even Leslie West, it's just stupid. The guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And you can make that mistake if you get carried away with one of these scales. You have to really study the person and see, because when you spot a person on a specific scale, okay, you write that down. When you assess him on another scale, that helps you because you already know that about him. And you might get to one where you say, I'm having a hard time spotting this guy. Okay, fine, go to another one. Because when you spot him on the second scale, remember, it improves your insight. That is why Septemics is a snowball of insight. The more you use it, the more insightful you become. And the more insightful you become, the easier it is to use it. So you use it more and you become more insightful.
When I'm speaking with clients and I'm listening, some of the scales come up quite quickly in my mind. It's like your reticular activating system gets engaged. Neurons wire together, they fire together. Because of the consistency of working on these scales, it starts to flash up and you go, okay, not as a judgment call, but as an observation and saying they could be at this level on that scale. And when I actually speak to them about it, they go, oh, how do you know that? And they may not even be aware of it because it's trapped in there, it's laying dormant in their subconscious mind. Then you bring it forward into the conscious realms, and all of a sudden they no longer become triggered into reactivity based on a historical mechanism. They start to see it for what it is because they've made it conscious.
Yeah, and you have to remember that anytime you correctly spot anyone on any level, you have a realization. And that is one of the indications that you have found the right level. Guys studying the scale, right? All of a sudden they say, oh, now I see. What do you mean? Now I'm at level 4. That explains why boppity 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 bop. He has a realization.
Yeah.
Sometimes the realization comes on before he even announces the level. And I always discourage people from telling their levels. But if you're in a context where you hear somebody's level, as a therapist, very often what you get is the realization. The guy's looking at it and he says, oh, now I see. That's why such and such. That was a result of him spotting the right level for him or somebody else. And that is the power of this subject, because you have an insight, a precise insight.
That's a really important point, because it lends itself to self-authorship. Remember when I asked you earlier on, so where am I on this scale? And you gave me all the rationale for why you're not going to tell me that. And now I realize that when I was speaking to this particular client, I didn't tell them where they were on the scale. I needed them to have the insight, because they have self-authorship and sovereignty.
My whole career as a human development engineer was distinctly non-evaluative. I wouldn't tell the client anything other than the time and date of the session. Once we started the session, I'm not there to tell him anything. I'm there to ask the right question, listen to what he says, analyze it, and then know from what I analyze what the next right question is. And at some point, he'll stop me, as I described to you 3 minutes ago. Wait a minute. Now I see. No wonder I have trouble with my wife. She's just like my mother. That's it. We're done with that subject for today. He realized it. See, I'll ask a question, and the guy's trying to answer the question. And instead of answering the question, he gives the realization. That's what I was saying a minute ago. This happens commonly. A person is studying a septemic scale, and he's not thinking about, let's say, his father-in-law, hypothetically. He says, wait a minute, this is my father-in-law, level 5. This is exactly how he is. His relationship with his father-in-law just improved because he understands him better. So it doesn't matter whether it's a high level or a low level, you're always happy when you find it. People are oppressed by the opinions of other people. Like the wife tells the husband, you don't know what you're doing. You're never going to get rich, and you're a bum. And he doesn't want to hear that. That's not helping. It's all evaluation. So what you want to do is say, here, look at this. You're having trouble in this area. Let's say you have a guy who's drinking too much, right? Show him this scale. Regarding your drinking, where are you on this scale? Then you'll go through that whole process I've delineated before. He reads the chapter, he comes back, he finds it exactly, he has a realization. And his power over his drinking just improved. It doesn't mean he'll become a teetotaler overnight, but he's got a leg up on it now. You can say to him, now that you realize that you cannot stop, let's move you up to can stop. And that becomes his focus. He goes to the bar and he has 2 beers and he says, wait a minute, I can stop. I don't have to keep drinking. I can stop. And he stops and goes home instead of drinking 5 beers and getting arrested for drunk driving.
That's what I love about this, because it's like a flashlight. There's the attention, and then the reach for the next level up is like an intention, which is the laser, the focus. And what I see in this is that this is offering people a practical toolkit of understanding as distinct from a rule book of behavior.
Right. The way you use this is up to you. For example, one guy could look at the scale. Let's say he's having a lot of trouble with his wife. She has emotional problems. He looks at the scale and says, oh, she stopped. See, now he understands. Okay, she stopped. That's where she is on this scale. So he can then try to move her up to cannot stop. That wouldn't be as bad. She might get into a thing there where she's eating ice cream and eating ice cream and eating ice cream. She cannot stop. That's not as bad as stopped. It's less insane. Regarding this ice cream that you're eating, where are you? Oh, yeah, I cannot stop. Yeah, I haven't thought about that. All right, let's move you up to can stop. And that becomes a thing in her mind. And she'll say, yeah, I can stop. It becomes like a point of pride, like a little badge of honor. Yeah, I stopped. I ate 2 scoops and then I put it away. And she's very happy about that now. It's very practical. I gave the example on an earlier scale about guy finds out that a girl wants to marry him because he's rich. And he says, no, I don't want to marry her. She's a gold digger. He breaks it off. He's not going to be unhappy about that. He's going to be happy because he found the truth. The next guy might say, what do I care if she's a gold digger? You want to go to Vegas? Here's $5,000. Have a good time. Maybe she looks so beautiful that he doesn't care if she's a gold digger. See, there's plenty of rich guys who know they were married for their money and they don't care because they have a 25-year-old wife. So it's very personal. And again, knowing your level, I'm not saying tell people your level, know it yourself. Now, if somebody spots your level, that's up to them. Because if they spot it, they're going to have a realization. Oh, that explains why Jim does X, Y, and Z. He's at this level. And if you tell them, you are denying them that epiphany.
Jim, thank you for your expertise and insights. You shed a lot of light on the complexities of human behavior and offering a unique perspective on historical figures and their positions on the scale. I would encourage listeners, as we navigate the diverse landscapes of human experience, to reflect on today's and previous lessons, discussions, and consider how the scale of stopping may provide a framework for understanding the motivations and behaviors of individuals throughout society and oneself. It's been an honor and privilege to have this discussion with you about the scale of stopping. Any parting words at all?
I just want to remind the viewers, if you want to find out about Septemics, go to septemics.com, where you can see what many readers have said, what many journalists have written. You can read the reviews, you can read part of the book, you can even listen to a lecture that tells you in an introductory way what this is about. So I invite you to the website, septemics.com, and then you can go from there and benefit from my labors.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Peter.